Hello, everybody, and welcome to this edition of the Atheist Experience. Today is July 19th, 2020. If you heard an echo of the intro song while it was playing, that was entirely my fault and not the wonderful tech crew that busted their ass to make sure that shit like that wouldn't happen. I left the secondary PC open with the audio on, and it came in through the mic. So how's everybody doing? We are live today, July, in the midst of this global pandemic and everything else. Still doing the show from home. There's a couple little housekeeping things to get out of the way. But first, you may know him from General Hospital, One Life to Live, or The Bold and the Beautiful, where he has won 3 Daytime Emmy Awards for Younger, Supporting, and Lead Actor. You might also know him from YouTube, where as Theoretical Bullshit, he's had discussions with William Lane Craig and others. That's where I first learned of him, and then we met at ApostaCon, I believe was the first time we met, and we've been friendly, if intermittent acquaintances since then. When I'm in LA, I always let him know I'm there. Got him and his wife to come out to the Magic and Skepticism show, and we've been talking about getting him on the Atheist Experience for like 8 fucking years or something. And yet it always used to require him being in Austin on a Sunday, and now it doesn't. So, ladies and gentlemen, everything remotely handled. The sweet, the smart, the impossibly good-looking friend of mine, Scott Clifton.
That was so nice. That was like the nicest intro. Thank you, Matt.
You've done incredibly nice things for me, and I will never forget the fact that you overnighted a headshot of yourself to my grandmother for Christmas when we found out that she watched your soap.
Oh my God, I forgot about that. That's awesome.
I was sitting in my It's my favorite story. I was sitting in my grandmother's living room just about a week before Christmas, and she's watching her soaps. And there you are on screen. And I was like, hey, he's a friend of mine. And she goes, you know him? And I messaged Scott right away. He got the address. He overnighted a headshot to my grandma. And for Christmas, she's sitting there opening it up. And here's one of her favorite soap stars.
Oh, that's so cool. Oh, that's so cool. That my good twin did that for you.
Yeah.
God knows I would never do that.
Let me do the housekeeping stuff real quick. This is the Atheist Experience, sponsored by the Atheist Community of Austin, a nonprofit educational organization promoting positive atheism and the separation of religion and government. You can call the show at 512-991-9242, or if you're on your computer, you can go to tiny.cc/callaxp, and that will let you call in. We have, oh my gosh, how full are the lines? Yeah, well, see, we can take more calls this way than we can in the studio, but there are lines and space open. We prefer theist callers, but we will take calls of all type. In addition, if you're watching us live right now on YouTube, instead of making use of the whatever other funding options we now have a donations link directly above chat, which you can see. That donations link, 100% of that money goes to the Atheist Community of Austin. We are a nonprofit organization. And so YouTube, Google, they don't take anything out of that. So every penny that you click on that donation link, I can already see we're up to like $119, goes directly to us to keep the shows running, to make sure that we have the tech equipment, to make sure that we can get guests on like this. And by the way, Scott's doing this of his own free will and good nature. I'm not paying him a penny. I hope I told you I wasn't paying you a penny.
What?
It's just got to be scale.
Yeah, no, scale plus 10%. That's the SAG after.
All right, I want you to Xerox your SAG card, send it to me. And, but yeah, in addition to those donations, there's also merchandise that you can buy, and you can have a YouTube membership, or you can support us on Patreon. Any of those things go to help us out. I'm really thrilled by the reception we've had from people during this difficult time. Things are a little different. There's going to be a slight delay in between me and my co-host. There's a slight delay between me and the people calling, and we're doing so much. Let me show you that. Put the crew cam up so you can see all the people behind the scenes who are actually making this show work in the absence of us all being in one place. There's our call screeners. There's the cat that is secretly in charge of all of it. And Greg, who is our new executive producer for all of the ACA content there. I see my call screeners and everybody, and you guys are just freaking awesome. How you been, Scott? It's been what, like a year and some change since the last time I saw you?
Yeah. And the last time I saw you, I had to run away very quickly to take care of a feral skunk in my house, if I recall correctly. We're doing okay. You know, I got a 4-year-old who's not home right now, but you know, that's like the worst possible age to be stuck at home with mom and dad. But he's a champ, and we're doing good. How about you?
I'm stuck here at home alone. As I mentioned before the show, I would dispute that 4 years old is the worst time to be stuck, because I wouldn't want to be stuck at home with my mom and dad. But it may be slightly more. You may bitch a bit more if you're 4 years old than if you do now. I'd just be sitting over in the corner going, "Oh God, no, stop, please. Can you just put a mask on? Can you maybe wash your hands now that the groceries have come in the house?"
Well, that's the first of what I anticipate to be many times I'll be proven wrong today. So here we go.
It's really, I'm optimistic because, you and I remember actually really vividly when we were at Apostacon, and I believe it was Omaha, and somebody brought me a bottle of Templeton Rye. And there were probably half a dozen to a dozen of us sitting around a table on one of the last days. And because I just passed the bottle around everybody, but you and I got to actually talk for the first time. And of course, I'd seen I think we'd exchanged an email or comment somewhere, but I'd seen your stuff, et cetera. And it was like, yeah, we should get you down for the Atheist experience. So here we are.
However many years later. Yeah.
And on that note, let's jump right into it, and we can take breaks in between and everything. But for the first caller for today, we've got Russell in Georgia, who says that alien encounters are consistent with the Bible, and the reason people think God is immoral is because we can't understand his plan. Welcome to the Atheist Experience. You're on live with Scott Clifton and Matt Dillahunty.
Whoa.
Russell,
are you there?
Uh-oh. Russell dropped. Well, crap. All right. Let's try Josh in Tennessee. Are you there, Josh?
Yes. Hi, this is Josh.
Hey, you're on with Scott and Matt. How are you?
Hey, Josh.
Hi. I just wanted my wife wanted me to call in. She's an atheist. I'm a Christian. And so she's really on top of her Bible knowledge, and so we're always kind of, she's trying to disprove God, and I'm trying to prove that it's the truth. So,
sure.
I kind of feel like there's so many different personal experiences with God that kind of, to me, that kind of proves that he does exist. And even though we can't see him, but we can certainly feel that he's around, in my opinion.
How would your wife respond to that?
She basically just says that you got to prove it. And
well, you mentioned personal experiences. You mentioned personal experiences with God. I'm wondering if you could give an example of a personal experience with God and how you know that it's a personal experience with God, because there are people who claim personal experiences with all kinds of gods and with alien abductions and others. How do we know that because you've experienced something that you think is an experience with God, that you're right?
I just through prayer and just going through the motions. Basically, it's when obviously everyone has their hard times and everyone has good times, and when we fall on hard times, it's just, to my personal experience, there's just God has always proven himself to help me in the end. So any struggle that I've had didn't really shut me down completely, but I've always came out better on the other side.
Yeah, so I understand that's what you believe happened. What I was asking is, how can we know that's what happened? Like, you think that God has helped you and God's spoken to you and you've had some sort of experience and God's helped you in trying times. How do we show that that's true and not just you think that God has helped you in those trying times?
Well, I guess it's just, you get that feeling. I don't know if you've ever heard of God bumps, like kind of like you get those goosebumps kind of, you just get that overwhelming feeling that he's there. And
so for the record, I'm a former Southern Baptist who was going to be a preacher and who has stood in church And while praising and singing, I've had God bumps, goosebumps, euphoria, been ecstatic, convinced that I was in the presence of the Holy Spirit. But that's what I was convinced of at the time. And when investigating it, it turns out that I can't demonstrate that that was true, and there's no good reason to think it was true. So on a couple of occasions here, I've asked you, how would you know that this is true? And you just keep coming back with that you're convinced. I mean, how could, and I'll let Scott jump in here because he may have a different take on this, but how can Scott and I know that when you experience God, you're actually experiencing God and not just saying you're experiencing God?
I guess that's based on faith, then. That'd be, it's a faith-based, it's obviously we believe in the Bible, and I consider the Bible a history book. It's, all the way from the Old Testament to the New Testament. So it's basically a history book, and a lot of the things that happen in the Bible, we can some of them we can use in our personal experiences, and I do know that my wife obviously pointed out the scriptures that are bad and stuff like that, and I get all that.
What about the ones that aren't true? Like when you go to Genesis and the order of events in creation don't match up with what science says the order of events would be. Doesn't that kind of show that that's not accurate?
I get what you're saying as far as, but we really don't know what really happened in the beginning. So, I mean,
okay, but we know there was never a time where there was one man and one woman whose names we knew, who were the originators and progenitors of the entire human species. We know that's not true.
Well, we don't.
Okay,
Hey,
well, I do. Go ahead, Scott.
Yeah, sure. So, hey, Josh, a couple of things stood out in what you said. One was that, based on your experiences, whenever you've had a hard time, it was God that lifted you up again. Are you familiar with confirmation bias? This bias that we all do, where we kind of count the hits and ignore the misses when it comes to interpreting data in light of like what we already believe. Like if you're driving on the road and you have this belief that Asians are bad drivers, right? Anytime somebody cuts you off and they happen to be Asian, you're going to go, see, I told you Asians were bad drivers, but you're ignoring the hundreds of times somebody cuts you off and they're not Asian, or the hundreds of times somebody doesn't cut you off and they are Asian. Do you know that concept where we kind of pick out what fits with our previously existing worldview and we ignore the rest?
I do, yeah. I mean, I see what you're saying in a sense that,
yeah.
obviously.
So do you think is it possible that you're doing that? I mean, when you say that every time you've had a hard time in life, God lifted you up again, is it possible that you're remembering all the times that maybe you prayed and you felt like that prayer was answered, but you're forgetting the hundreds more times when you're having a hard time and God didn't answer you? And maybe, you explain that away by saying God works in mysterious ways, or God has a lot of people to take care of, or God wanted me to learn a lesson from this. But doesn't it seem like we live in a world that's indistinguishable from God not existing at all? I mean, would you be saying the same thing if you were a refugee family in Saudi Arabia? Or do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, I mean, I've heard stories of people coming here that had nothing and just worked hard and maybe they were Christians and maybe they prayed and they'd be, they got really good careers and became very successful, and they could.
Do you think there are people who are Christians who prayed who are homeless and never had a good career?
It's possible. I mean, I can't speak for their path.
Okay.
Or what.
Of all the homeless people in the United States, do you think none of them are sincere, committed Christians? Do you think that's even likely?
I would think that some homeless are Christians, I would think.
So we actually have data on this, and most people who are not doing well in life tend to be more religious, and that makes sense, right? Except it falsifies the idea that believing in God or praying to a God guarantees any kind of prosperity, doesn't it?
Well, I mean, I guess every walk in life is different. And
Well, do you think the people who
are
are like poor and broke and homeless are just bad Christians? Like they didn't follow God, so God didn't reward them, and they're just getting what they deserve?
No, of course not.
Okay, I don't either. And I'm glad you said that. That was honestly not a trap. That was actually me asking because I think you're better than what some of your beliefs would belie. And the reason here is that you called in. We're trying to talk about, is there a good reason to believe there's a God? And when we ask you, what we get is, oh, well, it's just something you take on faith, or I've just have all these experiences. And when we start asking questions about those experiences and what conclusions one could reasonably address, or how an outsider could know that you're actually having an experience with God, you don't seem to have anything to come back with other than this is just like how you feel about it. And that's fine. It's your life, and you're going to believe whatever you're convinced of. It's just,
sure.
Could you imagine a different person calling in to this show with the exact same justification for their belief in a different God, that instead of the Christian God, maybe the Muslim God, or we'll just go with the God of the Jains or whatever. And they're convinced that they have some sort of interactions with their God, but they can provide no more evidence than you do. And they just say it's something that they take on faith and it's a matter of personal experience. Should we accept their personal experience?
That's a good question. And I mean, from my experience, I'm going to say no, because I believe in the Bible and God and Jesus.
Yeah, but see, that's the problem.
So Josh, that's interesting. So there's two reasons why you wouldn't accept somebody else's personal experience. Now, one would be just because the slot is filled for you, and that's sort of a more, that's kind of circular in terms of the way that you're reasoning there. But another reason could be, but honest, yeah, sure. I mean, it could just be that, I don't accept those other gods or those other reasons for other gods because I believe in this one and that's that. But I wonder if you do recognize that it is possible for people to have experiences that are indeed very profound for them, that feel very real for them, and that you, as an outsider to their faith, does not show that their religion is true. Like, that those kinds of experiences don't prove that the religion that they infer from it is actually true. So isn't it possible that you're making the same mistake, the same kind of inference that they are?
I really don't think so. I mean, I could go on and on. I mean, as far as, what, we have the temple in Jerusalem, and the fact that, there is a lot of things in the Bible that
But do you think a Muslim couldn't go on and on? Do you think a Muslim couldn't make the same argument against Christianity that you're making against Islam now?
I guess that's where, I'm kind of coming out and say this, but I guess that's where kind of Satan comes in, where, the delusion and
right. But they believe in Satan as well. And they believe that you're deluded. Right. So how do we tell which one of you is right?
Not only that, but and I don't want to derail this, so I apologize for this, but it comes up every time. Josh, you think there's a Satan who is trying to deceive us, right?
I do think so, yeah.
Okay. I did too. When I was a believer, I thought so too. And here's what fixed that for me. If there is a Satan who's trying to deceive us, is Satan able to do supernatural things? Like, can he manipulate reality in such a way that it plays with our perceptions and makes us think things that aren't accurate? Can he actively deceive in a way because he's more powerful than humans? Can't he do things that humans are just, you can't be immune to it, right?
If we don't have a good walk with Christ, I would say, yeah. I mean,
so yes, unless God is actively protecting you, you are absolutely prone to being a victim of Satan's tricks, despite your best intentions, right?
Yeah. I mean, to a certain point. I mean, obviously, we know everyone knows right from wrong. And
well, I'm not convinced that everyone knows right from wrong. As a matter of fact, I'm convinced that that's not true. And also, we don't all agree on what's right and wrong. So that's a big issue, which we may be able to dig into. But here's the thing. If there's a God and a devil, and the devil has the ability to manipulate reality in such a way as to confuse me, and the only way that I can be safe from the devil's manipulations is if God decides to protect me, that there's nothing I can do on my own to protect myself, then ultimately, whether or not I'm deceived by the devil is God's responsibility, not mine. And if I'm going to sit here and say, well, I'm definitely not deceived by the devil, and I don't have God, I can't say that. But similarly, no God could rightfully judge me for being deceived if the only protection is his and he refuses it.
Right. Well, I mean, too, but at the same time, once you're saved. And in my opinion, it's not hard to be saved by Christ. It's, you
let's stop this. Why doesn't God just save everyone right now?
That's a good question. I don't know. I don't know.
And until God answers it, I don't give a crap for apologetics like this. Until somebody, because you can say once saved, always saved. I have pastor friends that think that, who think they're going to see me in heaven because they think I was saved. I have parents who say once saved, always saved, who say that I wasn't actually saved. I was just, deceived. You can make up whatever you want. What we're looking for, what I'm looking for, what Scott's looking for, what everybody's looking, give us evidence, give us a good reason to believe. And if the reasons you give us to believe can be used by other people with other religions to get us to believe the same thing, then they're not good enough. We need something that is specific, that shows evidence for your proposition, that excludes others.
So I didn't make it up. I'm quoting from the Bible. So
I don't give it. Okay, go ahead, Scott.
I can't help but feeling like I'm interacting with a hostage tape or something. Josh, you don't sound like, you said at first that your wife sort of pressured you to call in, and you don't sound like somebody who's super enthusiastic about having to rationally defend your faith. You actually do sound like somebody who views your religion as a matter of trust, as a matter of faith. You don't sound like somebody who would allege that we can know with any kind of certainty that Christianity is true using evidence.
That's the thing. You're absolutely right. You can't. The evidence to prove that God exists isn't necessarily in the physical. There is some things in the physical, but like Jerusalem and the temple and stuff like that. But it is on a faith-based level, and people need to realize that. And if they don't, they don't. It's everyone's walk is different, and but that's just what I want. That's just what I want.
Where do you stand on? Where do you stand on damnation? I'm just curious. Do you believe? Are you an annihilationist? A universalist? Do you believe that your wife, unless you do something about it, is on her way to hell?
I don't really know the whole formality of who goes to heaven and who goes to hell. Of course, the Bible says that if you don't, the only way to God is through Christ. And if a person just says, forget about Christ, forget about God, I don't need that, and I don't really know what will happen to them. But for me,
do you think that your wife is a good person?
I do, yeah.
So would it be heaven for you to know that your wife is suffering for all eternity? I mean, could you enjoy being in heaven knowing that your wife is being infinitely tormented? I wouldn't. I mean, if I converted to Christianity and I genuinely believed that my wife was suffering the entire time that I was in heaven, that wouldn't be heaven for me. In fact, it would be hell. Do you feel that way at all?
Right. I do, and that's why we're always discussing, and she goes to church with me sometimes, and she doesn't believe in hell, but at the same time, as far as what the Bible says on those issues of hell, of heaven and hell, and you can kind of debate it all day long, but I really don't know for sure.
Let me jump in for a second, Josh. Let me jump in for a second here, Josh. So you sound like a nice guy, and you're willing to admit that there's a lot of stuff you just don't know. There was some stuff that you kind of push forward, like, once saved, always saved. So you have some doctrine you believe in, but you're not completely sure on the hell thing. I think that if you were married to a Christian woman, I think you'd be a little bit more sure about the hell doctrine thing than you are in your current position. But yes. That's just me going from the trend of what I've seen of other people. The Bible also says, do not be unequally yoked. So, there's issues there. But at the end of the day, here's the only thing I want from you, Josh. Your wife goes to church with you on occasion. Take some time and read. Here, go. I will offer to buy you a copy of this and send it to you. If you can talk with the people behind the scenes, and I'll get an email address or whatever else. I'm going to recommend Guy P. Harrison's 50 Reasons People Give for Believing in a God. It's a great starter book that doesn't require you to know everything about epistemology or philosophy or arguments. It's just a real nuts and bolts thing that a friend of mine wrote. He's written several books, but this one, 50 Reasons People Give for Believing in a God, goes through things people claim about why they believe in a God and offers response to them in tiny little essays. It's a great book of short stuff. It is a good introduction. I'd like you to read that with as much of an open mind as you can and realize that the reasons that you give for believing in God are something that somebody else could give for believing in a different God, or the same God with different doctrines, or any number of things. And that, wouldn't it be better to learn the best standards of evidence and to reserve judgment on something about whether or not there's a God until there's actually good evidence for it? Because you wanted to go back to faith several times. And I'm curious, do you think there's any position that I couldn't just accept on faith? Like, could I just be convinced that men are better than women based on faith, or that white people are better than black people just based on faith? Isn't that possible?
No, because that's...
No? You think it's not possible for somebody to be convinced that their race is superior based on evidence? Based on faith. The whole Bible. So let me ask this, Josh. So for all those people who think white people are superior to black people, if they're not making that decision based on faith, are you suggesting that they have good evidence to support that position?
No.
So then is it possible that they're just taking it on faith?
In a way, I guess you could say that, in their own way.
See, faith isn't a path to truth. No. Faith is the excuse people give for believing something when they don't have a good reason. Because if somebody asks, why do you believe this, and you have a good reason, you give the good reason. And if you don't have a good reason, you say you just have to take it on faith. So if you'd like a copy of the book, I'm gonna move you back to hold, and I'll let the call screeners get info, find out if you want a copy of the book, and I'll be happy to send it to you myself. But we're gonna move on to other callers because we only got like an hour left in the show. So
thanks, Josh. You're a good sport.
Thanks, Josh. So we did get Russell back, the first caller that we dropped, and I want to make sure we get to that. By the way, before anybody emails in to say, yes, they could believe for bad evidence and not just faith. Yes, I know that. The point is, if you use faith as your epistemology, you have no likelihood of getting to a true answer. But
right.
And there's something I need to ask you about after the show, because somebody sent me a screenshot of a fellow atheist making a very curious claim about epistemology, and I want to get your thoughts on it later. I hate doing that because it teases everybody.
Oh man.
But I can't do it on the show because of who it is. So I'll get with you afterwards.
Okay.
We got Russell and George's back on something about alien encounters being consistent with the Bible. You're on with Scott and Matt. How are you?
Hey guys, how are you doing? I'm so glad for grabbing me back. Thank you so much.
Sure, welcome.
Good to talk to you, Russell.
I just wanted to set the tone for this conversation before I dive in and let you know that I am going to keep it very brief. I know there's so many people as anxious to me to get on here and chat with you guys. Matt, I'm a huge fan of yours. I've been watching you guys on YouTube since I was like 13 for many years, and I'm 24.
That doesn't make me feel old at all.
I
think Scott was 12 when I started.
I've got a lot of respect for you, and I never really thought I'd get the chance to actually talk to you on this show. So it's an honor. But I'll go ahead and get right into it.
Thank you.
That was really vague as far as what my point was on that. But there was just three things I wanted to go over and get your feedback that I was completely open to, and open to going back and doing my homework if that's what it comes to. But the first thing is, as I listen to you guys show a lot, I hear a lot of times that we're pointing out to a lot of the things in the Bible that I myself, you, and many other people just wouldn't agree with in our day and age, from slavery to the massacres, and it's raised questions for me growing up, and something that I never understood. But a perspective that I came into was kind of when I had children, and I have two boys, a 3 and a 4-year-old, and there's so many times where I have so many principles that I want them to have when they grow up to understand that I'm not hard on them, but I'm not like typical fathers. And what I mean by that is, I make sure my kids go outside, whether it's hot, cold, regardless. I make sure that they read, they do things that aren't always exactly fun. And my youngest one is always crying at night, saying to his mother, why won't Dad hold my hand when we go to sleep every single night? I do it sometimes, but I don't do it every night. And he's upset, he's crying, and she tries to explain to him that he's a kid. And in that moment, even though I love him and I'm just trying to let him know that he can't have attachments all the time and he can't depend on me and I'm not always going to be there, I have to let him in that moment be upset and pretty much hate me for it. And the way I perceive God is that...
Yeah. I'm asking, do you? Because so I'm guessing that you're originally from the United States, as I am, right?
Yes.
Yeah. And I would have probably thought the same thing once upon a time. And then my brother adopted my niece and nephew, who were both Korean. And in Korea, it's far more typical for children to just sleep with parents for a long time. And so this attachment that you're trying to get your children to avoid, another culture actually encourages. So how do we know which one is right or better?
Well, I wouldn't say that we do. That's definitely, there's opinion circled around that. And what I'm getting at is, I believe I love my children, and I'm doing what I'm doing because I love them. And even though I know it has backlash to it, and in those moments I have to deal with him being upset, and there's so many different examples, I believe I'm doing what's best for him. And me as his parent, for the most part, I believe most good parents out there, not every parent is a good parent, but for most good parents out there, we know we're doing the right thing. And I look at it in the perspective of God, is that our morality, which is constantly changing over time. One minute we think things are right, and years later we find out we were wrong, and 70 years from now we say we were wrong about that. I feel like it's unfair to judge the things that God has decided to do, when the way the story is told is that we're the children and he's the parent, and that if he loves us as we believe him to love us, we will never understand, just like a child will never understand why a parent does what they do.
I'm going to let Scott completely address this for now and hold off because I'm about to go nuclear rant mode. So go ahead, Scott.
I knew that I could see on your face that you were going to do that. I'm going to rescue Russell from you. So Russell, first of all, I got to tell you, man, any parent who tells me that they're certain they're doing the right thing scares me. And I say this as a parent. I mean, half of parenthood to me is the uncertainty that I'm in fact doing the right thing, that I am making the right choice, the healthy choice for my children. But of course, I'm not omniscient, right? And that's part of your point. Yes, there are certain things that fall within a sort of framework of what could be good or what could be bad parenting. But I don't think anyone in the world would think maybe you were doing the right thing if you set your child on fire, right? Or if you sent a bear to maul your child to death. Or, I mean, we could name countless things that appear to be a clear vestige of a society that did not know down from up when it comes to morality, right? Because morality changes, we get wiser, we move on. So is it, do you recognize that there are some things that we don't actually have to say, well, maybe God had a good reason for burning someone for eternity?
I respect and I see where you're coming from 100%. And like I said at the beginning of the call, I myself have asked these questions. And one of my favorite questions that Matt has constantly said is, why doesn't God just drop down here, show himself, and then we'd all believe? Because I've asked that same question growing up is, why does it have to be so difficult? Why can't
I got another question for you.
Simple? Sure.
If God made us incapable of understanding his plan, how could he possibly judge us for failing to understand his plan? What kind of batshit crazy, asinine, immoral thug creates people and does not give them the ability to comprehend a plan and then punishes them for not understanding the plan?
I kind of expected you to ask that question, and I don't have the answer to that. I understand where you're coming from when you ask that question, because I wouldn't say I phrased it that way, the way you just did, but I've felt the same way on many different occasions. But just to, and I'm not conceding or saying that I'm right, but just so I can save time for everybody else and you guys, I want to say one more thing on this point, and I'm just going back to the very start of it when I said, of course, I would never set my child on fire. That is me. That's my objective opinion, and I don't agree.
What if God told you to?
That would be helping my child.
What if God told you to?
Of course, not in the sense that I would do it. No,
What if God told you to?
Totally. I couldn't do it. That's something I just couldn't do. I could not obey that because I could not get past my own moralities that I think is right. But what I'm coming back to is, in the next 50 years, all these things that we're saying is okay, that's going to change. And then they're going to keep flip-flopping and keep changing. So
I don't know what you're talking about.
I'm saying our morality is so fickle. We can't ever take it as it's absolutely correct, because it's just going to
I agree there.
Every so many odd years.
I would agree. Our current understanding of what is moral is not absolutely correct. Our current understanding of the universe isn't absolutely correct. We're learning and constantly improving, but it's not like we're going to turn around and say, you know what? Lopping off people's heads randomly was moral all this time, and we just didn't know it. That's not going to happen.
No, I couldn't see that happening either.
Right.
And that's when it comes back to me, even as a theist.
See, the thing is,
a question that I'll never understand.
The other foundational flaw behind everything you're saying is you have this presumption that there is a God who has a plan, and I have no evidence of that. I have plenty of people telling me about a plan or telling me to trust a God that has a plan, but I got into this discussion, and I'm going to do this very cautiously, about politics the other day, where somebody suggested that somebody who was not a fan of the current administration suggested that maybe if we all got together and supported the current administration for another 4 years, that would make things so bad that we would never have to deal with the things that they don't like again. And I was like, so basically you want to roll the dice that if we make things really awful, we'll cure racism and poverty and all of these other issues, and we'll have, healthcare for all by just by burning it all to the ground. And I can't do that because, first of all, I don't see that as a likely outcome of this. And also, the fucking house is on fire from my perspective right now. And you deal with immediate triage. So it's nice to say, hey, my children have to trust me, except that children only have to trust you to a point. And you, as the parent, should be one of the first ones to acknowledge that you're likely to be wrong, should be encouraging children to question, even to the point of where they're rambunctious and rebellious, because at least now you know they're not just going to take everything that you tell them as gospel. That scenario that becomes analogous to a God having a plan for us is really cute, except A, we have no reason to believe there's a God, no reason to believe there's a plan, and no reason to think that the people who are telling me about God's plan are likely to be right. So at the end of the day, I'm stuck with this believers suggesting that I just need to let go and let God. And I'm like, that's where you get songs like Jesus Take the Wheel. But are you ever going to be driving down the road, take your hands off the wheel, close your eyes and say, drive Jesus, ever? No, you're not. No. And neither is anybody with any sense. So let's stop pretending that this fuzzy analogy that's about doctrine and theology is in any way tied to decisions we make in reality. There's zero decisions I need to make in reality that should consider whether or not there's a God with a plan.
It really is a pretty bad analogy to compare God to a parent. That analogy breaks down in just about every possible way. A good parent, anybody's idea of a good parent is nearly the antithesis of the God that we see in Scripture.
Okay. I respect that. And like I said, I know there's so many other callers, and to save, everybody the time, there was two other things that I wanted to bring up. And one of them, which was very vague on the call screening, was I hear a lot of conversation throughout the years of watching the show about believers, and a lot of times they're countered with, the alien abductions and do we believe in aliens and things like that. And I will be the first one to tell you, I am probably the only person that is a theist that believes in God, but at the same time has a really solid belief on why I feel like it's more probable to think they exist than God does. And I'm talking about that from a scientific standpoint when I say, if we're able to verify that there are different planets in our solar system, that there are other suns and other possibilities of sustaining life, would you agree that, only for the fact of the question I'm asking, would you agree that that is more evidence for aliens than we even have for the God that we read in the Bible alone?
Yeah, I don't think our solar system is the key here. We're talking about a universe with, you've got trillions of solar systems in a galaxy. You've got trillions of galaxies. So to deny that there's, or to reject the possibility that there's some kind of life, or intelligent life on some other planet, seems pretty irrational. It's another question altogether whether that life could or would visit us. But I actually think it's pretty consistent. I think it's pretty cool of you as a Christian. I never heard you actually say that you're a Christian, but it sounds like it. To say that maybe God created multiple planets, right? Maybe God created multiple civilizations, and maybe some of them fell and some of them didn't. I actually have a Christian friend who believes this, that there are different possible worlds, like, actual planets that, one of them fell, one of them didn't, and each one goes its own way. I kind of hold his feet to the fire about the logistics of that and how that exactly would work. But it does seem like an awful waste of space if you're a creator to,
One thing that drives me insane is that we have this attitude about the Bible that the story was written and then it just stopped. To where, if you actually believe, for the people that do believe in God, like we say we do, there's a story being written right now, that we're not picking up or buying in a store or reading about online. And one thing that drives me insane is, well, if God is real, then there's no possibility that aliens can be real. But what I don't like about that statement is God himself let's take the vernacular out of it, what you see on TV. To what we know, God is an alien himself. And I say that because he's clearly, if he exists, you know, above us, and he is not from here. If anything, I don't see why it's so hard to adopt the process that if these encounters are real and they do exist, they could lead to the very questions that we have about God himself. What do you guys say to that?
I don't believe that people are actually being visited or abducted by aliens. And you seem like a really nice person who's currently willing to accept anything that might potentially have any sort of evidential support as a possibility, ultimately in a sense that leads to something that's utterly useless, where you're like, oh, well, God's an alien or whatever. The notion that we're alone in the universe, when you look at things like the Drake equation, I'm convinced that there's a strong likelihood that there's life elsewhere in the galaxy just because of the size, or in the universe, just because of the size of it. Whether or not it's intelligent, who knows? Whether or not it's still around, who knows? But the distances required for coverage suggest that it's unlikely, and the unremarkable nature of our tiny little blue orb suggests it's incredibly unlikely that aliens have actually visited. And the only way to get around this is through conspiracy theory thinking, where it's just a big hidden conspiracy, like the aliens haven't shown up and interacted with people, and they just seem to want to mutilate cows and teach people how to build big piles of rocks, or put drawings of people with huge penises on the sides of things, or draw lines somewhere. It is absolutely conspiracy theory thinking, which it means that you take disparate facts and weave together a compelling narrative that on the surface seems reasonable and yet does not have a foundation underneath it.
I don't know.
Well,
I don't get from Russell that he's arguing that we've been visited by aliens. Now, maybe Russell does happen to believe that, but I took his point to be something. And Russell, you correct me if I'm wrong here, but I remember Michael Shermer once making an interesting point about how we view the supernatural. And he said, if there is such a thing as the supernatural, it can only be mysterious for so long. The more we know about the supernatural, the more we realize that even that realm of reality would have to have its own laws and its own behaviors, yep, and its own cause and effect. So I am sympathetic to the idea that if there was something that we perceive as a God, we're starting with the assumption that a God exists, and there's something that we perceive as that God, that it's not unthinkable that there's a naturalistic explanation for what we think is a God. Now, the problem with that is that in taking that position, you do have to reject certain parts of Scripture, and of course. Mm-hmm. You probably reject many parts of Scripture. Even the most fundamentalist Christian rejects certain parts of Scripture because there's too much tension with what we know empirically to be true. But I think the idea that God is an alien just sounds like a really, really oversimplified way of saying God is not supernatural and couldn't be supernatural. You just peel enough layers away and then you just get more nature. Does that sound right?
To an extent, and to respond to what Matt said about the conspiracy theories and different things like that, Matt, I don't acknowledge in a lot of people's thoughts and the possibilities. For me, I always, ever since I was really young, I take an investigative standpoint from it, and I love the phrase "where there's smoke, there's fire," and I always look at it from the degree of, okay, if I'm investigating a murder and I don't know who committed this murder, but I've got multiple witnesses tell me that they saw this one guy cross that house just hours before it happened, I'm not saying that guy committed the murder. But if I find that consistency in everybody's story when they've got different stories, but this guy is always crossing that house in every story, no one's claiming that he did it, that guy becomes very interesting and a key piece to my investigation. So my angle is not that, a lot of these conspiracy theories about the aliens, they're real and this is exactly what's happening. I'm not gullible about that. My point here is, like he said, I'm not looking at God like everyone else as this invisible being that is supernatural when he could just be godlike, because he's above us, because he knows more than we do, because he knows how to start life, maybe even in that scientific standpoint that we talk about, but we just haven't been able to understand that yet.
Okay, whose fault? Whose fault, Russell? Whose fucking fault is it that we don't understand God?
I have no idea.
It's got to be God's. If there's a God and God made us and he made us incapable of understanding, it must be his fault, right? How could it possibly be my fault that I don't understand the person who created me? How could that possibly be my fault?
Well, I know the path you're going down here, but
there's no path. I'm done. I'm at the
He's
end
already
of the
down
fucking
it.
point. It's there. Whose fault is it? If God created us and he created us unable to understand him, whose fault is that?
Sure, that would be his fault.
Exactly.
But I can go back to the analogy about me taking my son.
You can analogize all you want, but the argument is defeated at that point. Whose fault is it? It's like if somebody wrote a video game and the characters in the video game were too stupid to follow directions. Whose fault is that?
Sure, I understand, but
there's
the point
no way
is
out
that
of this.
I'm not calling you guys. I'm not calling you guys to win a discussion or win a debate. To be more,
what are you calling us for? Because I'm confused now and I don't know.
The premise here is to bring a totally different perspective to ease up the fact that
the premise of the show, Russell, is for people to talk about what they believe and why, so that we can evaluate it to tell whether we agree or disagree. So I'm not interested in navel gazing, speculative, bong hit, let's talk about aliens and God. I want to know what people believe and why, and whether or not there's good reason to believe it. And if at the end of the day, you've just got some analogies that still don't undermine the fact that you're trying to say, maybe we just don't understand God. You know what? Maybe we do. You can sit here all day long and do the maybe we don't understand God, but your argument falls apart because in your view, God is the creator who created us incapable of understanding. In my view, there isn't a God, and I think we understand that.
Okay. Well, if that's the case, then I would end my entire conversation with a question, leading into what brought me into being a believer in the first place. Matt, you said that you were, and I believe you. It's a shame that some callers have called here and they've challenged your walk.
Okay, that doesn't bother me. Just get to the question. Just get to the question. It doesn't bother me what callers say about me. I don't even care what some of my friends say about me. Go ahead.
Was there ever a time in your life where you asked God for things or you asked for his guidance and you honestly believe that he answered your prayers? I'm sure the answer is yes.
Yes, there were times where I was convinced that I had answered prayer. Yes.
Now ask me that question.
Just because.
We will.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, sure. And let's reply that same question to you.
No. And you know what the difference between me and Matt is?
What's that?
I never believed in God.
Okay.
So now you get two wildly different perspectives. So continue on with your question. You've got two different answers. Let's go. This has been fun.
Well, what I'm asking you now is, what made you come from, I'm 100% sure that God was responsible.
I didn't say that.
So were you ever at a point where you asked God for something, or you prayed to him and he fulfilled it for you? Did it ever happen to you? You were something bad.
No, what I said, you asked me if I was ever convinced that God answered prayer. Yes. Was I ever 100% certain? I've never been 100% certain of anything in my entire life. So did I at one point think that God had answered prayer? Yes. Do I still think that God answered prayer? No. And the difference between that is because I evaluated how one would go about figuring out whether or not a God actually answered prayer, or whether a human being with a flawed understanding actually became convinced that a God answered prayer, when in fact that isn't what happened. Understanding the nature of evidence and what it should take to prove a point is what ultimately convinced me that my prior belief in God was incorrect.
So is it unfair to say that if you've never been 100% certain that he answered your prayer, that you weren't actually a believer? Would you have to be 100% certain?
No, I'm not. I've never been 100% certain. No, Russell, I've never been 100% certain about anything, and I do not think anyone can be 100% certain about anything.
Okay. Just to briefly go over why I asked you that question. For me, when I was coming to my walk of understanding what I thought creation was and going over Buddhism and everything else, I gave a lot of my time and energy, and I feel like a lot of people can say that. But
Russell, I honestly don't think we need the story. We went through everything. You asked a question. I answered with a yes. Scott answered with a no. You then misrepresented my answer to be about 100% certainty, and I've corrected that. At the end of the day, I used to believe, and now I don't. And the reason I don't is because I gained a better understanding of the nature of evidence of what should convince people, and found out that I had been convinced for bad reasons, which is why I'm happy to talk to people like you and point out why I think you are convinced for bad reasons. But I don't need another story about why you asked a question.
Okay. It's the fact that for me, that answer isn't a no. And to respond to you on the line as well. That
okay,
answer isn't a no.
I was politely trying to end the call, and now I'm just going to hang up and move on to somebody else.
Take care, Russell.
Thank you. I don't need an extra story about why you just asked me that question. So you were never a believer. What's the closest you've ever come to having any sort of experience that might have led you down that path?
Wow, that's a great question. Yeah, what would be the closest?
Because he was basically asking, was there ever a time when I sincerely believed God answered prayer? Yes, there was a time. It's not now. That time is in the past.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, you've obviously, I'm assuming you've been to church at some point. You've engaged with people who are believers all around. People have tried to convince you for years.
Oh, yeah.
Has there ever been a point where you were like, yeah, maybe, or let me explore this?
God, you
like
know,
as a living thing, not as an intellectual. Have you always? I guess I'm saying, have you always just explored it as an intellectual exercise, or have you made attempts in there? Because I'm constantly told, like even with Ray Comfort the other day, his thing was, well, you have to live it, and then you'll know.
Yeah. I've certainly. I don't want to take too much time on this, but just a little bit of background on me. I grew up in a secular household with philosophical but totally secular parents. We had a language of religion, but it wasn't until I was older that I really realized that people took religion seriously, like actually believed that God was like a literal thing and not a metaphor. And then something happened. We had to move to a sort of pocket of Southern California that was very, very religious. It was like an evangelical community. And suddenly I'm a practice dummy for apologetics and evangelism, right? And so I'm going to church with all. This is the only way I could not be socially ostracized, was to go to church and read Case for Christ and read the Bible and do the Christian summer camps. And also my entire world was evangelical Christianity. I was just the one kid that didn't believe it. And I wish I could say that there was some moment where I really was, I felt like some kind of pull toward, and it never had, I never had any experience like that. And I think part of the reason for that is just because there was no, the word indoctrination is condescending, but you know, there was no indoctrination running on my hard drive that even treated that as a live option. And so now, of course, I've done it before. I'm happy to, if somebody asks me, in fact, I did this on Twitter like a year or two ago. If somebody says, you know, sincerely pray that God show himself to you. And if he doesn't, then fine. But, you know, I think he might. I am happy to do that. I am happy to take that seriously and perform that test. And I've done that many times. Obviously, nothing happened. But, you know, my disbelief is not some kind of reaction to any kind of religious temptation or, I never, that part of my brain never activated, I guess.
Yep. All right. Well, let's, I'm looking at the queue here, and there's a handful of theists, and wow, we've got like a half hour left. So let's see if we can kind of get through here. Kendall in Seattle, you're on with Scott and Matt. How are you?
What's up?
Hi, Kendall.
Hey,
You have a question for Scott, so I put you on so you could ask Scott your question.
Ooh.
Sure. Okay, so if Christianity was proven true, would you become a Christian by repenting your sins in order to obtain salvation?
Yeah, that's a fair question, because part of the reason that I think Christianity can't be true is because you can't reconcile the idea of a perfectly loving God with the actions and behaviors attributed to that God in Scripture, right? So there's a bit of a tension here. If I actually believed that everything that Scripture states, aside from the obviously allegorical stuff, is true, then I would I would have to come to the conclusion that that being is not a being worthy of worship or repentance. This is a being that, unthinkably, I am morally superior to. I mean, I haven't committed genocide, right? So that is tough. Yeah, I actually don't think that if I believed propositionally Christianity was true, I would become a Christian. I think I would just fall into a deep, deep despair for everyone I know and love.
Yeah. And my answer is pretty similar in the sense that if it were proven that there were a God, of course I would stop being an atheist and I would believe that there's a God. But would I follow that God? And irrespective of whether it's the God of Christianity or Judaism or some other thing I don't know about, first of all, I think that the very notion of worship is something that could not be demanded or expected. It is either deserved or it's not by character. And the type of being that would demand worship and reverence cannot be deserving of it. So I would not follow or be reverent towards or worship a God like that. But if it turns out it was like the God of the Bible and he just showed up and said, hey, I'm Yahweh and let's talk. And he finally, decided to not be a coward and show up and interact with me the same way he supposedly showed up and interact with other people, he'd have a lot of explaining to do before he'd have an ounce of my respect. So while I could definitely believe anything that's demonstrated, whether or not I would live my life by the strictures of some God is, it's like saying, once I'm convinced there's a king, does that mean that I do whatever the king says I should do? And I don't know. Maybe I'd probably just be a revolutionary.
Kendall, if it helps at all, I have a YouTube channel, and the YouTube channel is called Theoretical Bullshit. And I have a video on that channel that you can Google right now and watch it if you like. It's about 9 minutes long, and it's called "And What If I'm Wrong?" And I think I'll do a more thorough treatment of that answer, of that question that I do here. So that might tell you my position.
And answer the question, Kendall?
Yeah.
Sure.
I mean, sort of. I mean, I guess my response is like, because I specifically said if Christianity was true. And so when you say and talk about morality and all that, and you have a problem with that, and that's why you would say no still. I'm just thinking like, wait a minute. If it's true, then it's true that he is objectively moral.
No.
So yeah. Here's the problem with that. If Christianity is true, then moral means something very different than what I think it means now. If Christianity is true, moral is synonymous with obeying God's commands or being consistent with God's nature. And that's all morality can mean. I mean, by definition, that's what good means. Good means consistent with God's nature, right? So if God's nature is one of cruelty, then that means cruelty is moral. If God's nature were one of dishonesty, then that means dishonesty is moral. I don't value those things. I don't care what label you put on them. If you want to call them moral, then I'm not interested in being moral. Right? What I'm interested in is human suffering and well-being. Well, not just human, but the suffering and well-being of conscious creatures. And the God of the Bible does not seem terribly interested in that.
There's a reason that Scott and I gave you longer answers, because in your mind, when you say, if we assume Christianity is true, that means you've got a morally, objectively perfect, loving God, etc. The truth is, there are many different varieties of Christianity that have many different doctrines, and that while all of them would say that God is moral, that doesn't mean God is moral. And the only thing that I have in all of the universe to judge the character of the God of Christianity is the Bible. And the Bible sanctions slavery. The Bible sanctions misogyny. The Bible sanctions second-tier status for women with regard to property. It has rules against things that aren't necessarily immoral, like prostitution and homosexuality. It has a number of things that I would say any being that advocates for that does not understand what it means to be good and does not care about humankind, human suffering, or the well-being of thinking creatures. You begin with, yeah, it's true, it's good, there's God, God must be good. Well, before we can determine that God is good, God's got a lot of explaining to do as to why he either did or sanctioned the things that the Bible supposedly says he did or sanctioned, or why he allowed that book that portrays him as someone who did or sanctioned those things to persist unchallenged for the entirety of history, from the time it was written till now.
The short answer is, if Christianity is true, then being moral, that is to say, following God's commands, is a bad idea. It's bad for me. It's bad for other human beings. It's bad for all sentient creatures everywhere. So being moral, ironically, becomes a bad thing. I don't want to be moral, given the definition, if Christianity is true,
Well, I mean, Scott, I mean, come on now. I mean, when did Jesus say slavery was good and all this stuff? You see,
well, hang on. Kendall, is Jesus,
go ahead.
God, is Jesus God in your view?
Well, if Christianity is true, then yes.
Okay. So have you read Exodus 21, where God gives instructions to Moses about slaves?
Is that New Testament?
No. Why does it matter?
Well, then why are we talking about? We're talking about Jesus and his moral character.
No, sir. You don't get a New Testament without an old one. You don't get a Jesus without the 10 Commandments. Are you throwing out the 10 Commandments? Are you throwing out Genesis? Are you throwing out Exodus?
No.
Okay, then stop asking me whether it's in the New Testament. Have you read Exodus 21?
Yes, I have, but
and doesn't Exodus 21
civil laws with
Kendall
laws and moral laws?
No, Kendall. In Exodus 21, doesn't God sanction slavery?
What do you mean by sanction? Are you regulated?
Does God suggest that it is okay for human beings to own other human beings as property, pass them on to their children, and beat them as long as they don't die within a couple days? Is that what's in Exodus 21?
I want to be clear. I want to understand what you mean by sanction. Are we talking about, because there's a difference between allowing?
Why are you dancing around this?
Okay,
I want to understand. It's not dancing around.
Okay, Kendall, if I say to you, you may have the bag of chips in my cabinet, in my cupboard. You may have the bag of chips. And that's what we mean by sanctioning. Okay, you may do this. Right. Does God say you may?
Okay.
And so in Exodus 21, does God allow slavery?
He allows a certain form of slavery that isn't like what we understand to be slavery.
Actually, Kendall, in Exodus 21, God allows two different types of slavery because there's different rules for Jewish slaves than there are for non-Jewish slaves. Jewish slaves have a completely different set of rules at the beginning of Exodus 21 than non-Jewish slaves. Jewish slaves can only be held for 7 years unless you trick them into becoming slaves forever. Non-Jewish slaves are your property to be passed on to your children. And does Exodus 21 say you can beat slaves as long as they don't die within a day or two? Yes, it does. Do you think that's moral?
We have to define what we mean by slavery.
Do you think that beating people is moral?
It is not moral. I agree.
Congratulations. You're better than your God. You're better than your Bible. And I wish you'd have been honest enough. I wish you'd have been honest enough to actually acknowledge that from the beginning. Because it's embarrassing to have people like you call in to do, oh, well, Christianity and God's good. And then when I bring up something, you're like, is that the New Testament? It doesn't make any fucking difference if it's a New Testament, if you believe that God is responsible for the Old Testament as well. And in the Old Testament, he sanctions beating people as long as they don't die within a day or so, which you would say is immoral, which I would say is immoral, but your God is okay with.
All that, but I guess that's the show, but
that's not the show. It's your fucking book. It's not the show. It's your book.
No, that's just you. That's just you. You're not even allowing me to explain what that we're not on the same page.
I have 5 Bibles sitting right next to me. Do you have a preferred Bible version you'd like me to fucking read from? No, Kendall, this is not going away. Kendall, do you have a preferred Bible version Are you saying I'm wrong about what the Bible says? Am I wrong?
You're wrong about what it's allowing. If you're defining slavery as mistreatment and forced labor, you're saying that at any point that the Bible allowed that, those two definitions, if we agree that those two definitions of slavery, if those two definitions are included in slavery, if you're telling me, did the Bible allow that? I'm saying it absolutely did not ever.
Then you don't know your Bible, and you've never read it, and you don't understand it, or you are blatantly lying about it. I'm going to read it to you now, and I'm going to put your ignorant ass on hold, on mute, while I read the passage that we're talking about. I'm going to read just from the King James Version so that people don't think that, because this is the authorized AV 1611 version. If men strive and hurt, whoops, that's the wrong verse. I'm going to go down a little bit. I don't have this highlighted. You know why? Because this is my Bible from when I was a child. And while I have things highlighted from chapter 20, I don't have anything at all highlighted from chapter 21, because like you, they never preached from this chapter. But it begins with, now there are ordinances which thou shalt set before them. If thou buy a Hebrew servant, 6 years shall he serve, and in the 7th year he shall go out free for nothing. And if he came in by himself, he'll go out by himself. If he was married, then his wife shall go out with him. If his master has given him a wife, and she is born him sons or daughters, the wife and her children shall be her masters, and he shall go out by himself. In case you don't understand, what that's saying is, if you buy a Hebrew slave and you give him a wife, after 6 years, the Hebrew slave has to go free, but the women and children that he's married to and sired stay with the master. And so that upsets a particular circumstance, so that if the servant plainly says, hey, I love my master and my wife and my children, and I don't want to go out free, then the master shall bring him before the judges. He shall bring him to the door, under the doorpost, and his master shall bore a hole in his ear. It's not gruesome. It's like piercing your ear, to mark your property. And he shall serve him forever. Then it continues on down a little later, talking about, you shall buy your slaves from the heathen that surround you, that you can pass them on to your descendants. And that if a man punishes his manservant or maidservant, he should be given their master 30 shekels of silver, and the ox shall be stoned. That's for the ox. I lost it.
Hey, can I actually ask? I just want to ask Kendall if you could unmute him for a second.
Of course.
Just so we're all clear on this, okay? So Kendall, what are the defining features of American chattel slavery, which we all agree was abhorrent? What are the defining features of American chattel slavery?
Well, I'm glad you want an actual conversation, Scott.
I swear, if you pull a snarky thing like that again, I'll hang up on you, whether Scott wants to talk to you or not.
Kendall, I don't want Matt to hang up on you, so just talk to me here.
I gave him the answer.
Well, tell me again, what are the defining features of American chattel slavery? Treating people like property is one, right?
Yeah, mistreatment. Mistreatment
alone is not slavery.
That's one.
Okay, wait.
That's one.
Hold on. So even a slave master, so if somebody treats somebody well, it can't be slavery? Wait, we're talking about treating humans as property, right? That's the number one defining feature of chattel slavery.
Yeah, mistreatment and forced labor against their will. Those are the two things.
Forced labor against their will. Do you agree with me that treating human beings as property is an essential feature of American chattel slavery and one of the reasons it was so wrong? Do you believe that a human can ever, under any circumstance, be treated as property?
If you mean against their will, and when you say property, absolutely
Jesus
not.
Christ, how could you be a willing slave? Let's stop with that. Let's stop with the against the will.
Mistreatment. Why? That is the central feature. You got to be kidding me.
Okay, no. Here's the easy thing, Kendall.
Slavery.
Kendall,
Parents mistreat their children. That doesn't mean they're slave owners.
Kendall, will you willingly be my slave under the rules of Exodus 21?
Guardian stewardship? Yeah, I would. But that's
cool. So I get to beat you. Okay. I get to beat you as long as you don't die within a couple days, right?
No. Okay, well, let's explain that. Can I address that, or are you just gonna not allow me to address
hold on. No. Wait. Before we get to that, I'm sorry. This is we're dancing around. The elephant in the room here is Leviticus 25. It's not Exodus. Can I read you Leviticus
Yep,
25?
go for it.
Go ahead.
All right, here we go, Kendall. Your male and female slaves are to come from the nations around you. From them, you may buy slaves. You may also buy some of the temporary residents living among you and members of their clans born in your country, and they will become your property. You can bequeath them to your children as inherited property and make them slaves for life, but you may not rule over your fellow Israelites ruthlessly. Now that sounds a lot like American chattel slavery to me. We bought our slaves from the nations around us. We treated them like property. We inherited them to our children who could make them property for life. And then as Matt says in Exodus, we were allowed to beat them. We couldn't beat them too. There were actually laws against beating them too harshly. Just like, so we've got Israel and we've got America. It's the analogy is almost perfect.
Right. Okay. Can I respond?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So, when it says promised forever, when you're talking about Leviticus, it's not the services of each individual bondsman, because human beings do not live here on this earth forever.
Oh my fucking God. Do you read Hebrew at all?
Hold on. Can I explain?
No, I'm muting you. I'm muting you again because I'm not going to let you explain things.
Also,
if you,
Kendall is wrong. It's not
because you're
forever,
being
it's for life.
dishonest in this because you don't know. If you read Hebrew, metaphorically forever, that they will become your property to be passed on, doesn't mean forever as in eternity. How dare you? How dare you try to suggest that the Bible doesn't say that they're your property for life because nobody lives forever? How dare you? It's embarrassing.
You didn't even allow me to. You didn't
I
allow me to
keep going.
explain.
Keep going.
Let me finish.
Yes, because you said something that was abhorrent, so I'm going to interrupt you and correct it. Now you can continue to say abhorrent things.
Oh God. Go ahead, Kendall.
It was a succession of individuals, okay, that it is said they shall be bondmen forever, okay? It's individual.
That's not what Leviticus 25 says, Kendall. Leviticus 25 says make them slaves for life.
Not 25:46 says they're your inheritance for your children. They are your property.
Yes, yes, it's in bondsmen. It's bondsmen forever. They're not. They're talking about shall be for each individual bondsman. So yes,
bondsman forever. That's slave forever.
Yes, that's what I meant. For that bondsman, yes.
Yes, they are slaves forever. What are you not understanding here, Kendall? You're now agreeing with us that they're slaves forever, that you can pass on to your children as property. It literally says it. Scott just read it to you.
You gonna let me finish? Okay, it says shall be your bondman forever. Yes, bondman forever.
Yes, that's slave.
It does not say that.
Oh my God.
Yes.
Do you realize that the Bible wasn't written in English, right?
Yes.
You do realize the Bible was not written in English.
Yes.
Do you understand Hebrew?
Do I understand Hebrew?
Do you read and understand Hebrew?
No, I don't understand.
Then this conversation is over because you are not qualified and you're reading an English word and making an absolutely embarrassing conclusion from it because what the Hebrew...
One more thing.
Okay, one more thing and then you're done.
Okay, okay.
I want to be as fair as possible. Please say something else abhorrent.
The year of Jubilee marked the beginning of the end to all forms of slavery.
Oh my God, you are a monumental idiot. The year of Jubilee was every 50 years, and in that year of Jubilee, you had to let slaves go free. Every 50 years, you have to let slaves go free.
Exactly. Okay.
Grad, you know what the average lifespan? Do you know what the average lifespan was when this was written? You get to be my slave for the next 50 years because unlike anybody else, you just got pwned. He hung up. He hung up.
Oh, he did. Okay.
I did not drop him. He hung up. I can't do this. I can't. It's embarrassing because, and it happens all the time. Like I've stood in a room with 4 serious apologists who know this shit, unlike random, doodad who doesn't understand the Hebrew, hasn't bothered to look into it, and thinks that if it says bondman, it can't mean slave. No, you just don't understand. But I stood there with 4 serious apologists, and they all tried to give different excuses for slaveries and different explanations for it. And finally, I just looked at them and said, you guys sort this out. And when the 4 of you agree on an answer, that's the one that I'll address. I haven't heard from any of them since.
That really is the slavery issue is, I think, the most frustrating, most just obviously, just the worst hill for a Christian to want to die on. And they seem like they dive on their sword all the time. Yeah, not everybody, not all Christians, but to try to make excuses for that and to fail to see the big picture that what are the chances that a morally perfect being would say that you may own people as property for the rest of their life. And what are the chances that a morally perfect being would say? Clearly, we're talking about 2 different versions of morality here. And that is the bottom line. You can get into the minutiae all you want, but there is no defense for that. It doesn't matter if you call it manservant or maidservant or slave. The details are what matter.
Yeah.
Okay.
You're not my slave forever. You're just my bondsman forever, and I get to pass you on to my kids and smack you around as long as you don't die.
And you're my property. But,
yeah. But I'm going to call you. I'm going to call you a rose. You're not a slave. You're a rose.
That's right.
So there's a ton of callers and a ton of theists, and we technically only have like 10 minutes or so, unless we run a little bit over.
No. I'm happy to go as long as you want for what it's worth. I know you guys probably have a set end time, but
I don't want to make the crew go too long. But let's see if we can get to some theist callers with a little expediency and without me getting off on a tangent about slavery for the 100 millionth time on this show. So Mo in Canada wants to know, how you doing, Mo? Is there an advantage to prayer? Is that what you were asking, Scott?
Hi, Mo. Sorry. Hi, Matt. Sorry. I'm just really excited to be on. Actually, I've been following you guys for quite a while. And yeah, absolutely. I'm doing pretty well. And I wanted to just have a bit of a discussion and just wanted to ask a couple questions regarding, prayer, crisis of faith. Is that okay to do?
Sure.
Yeah, for sure. So just a bit of a background. I'm a non-practicing theist, questioning Muslim actually. So that's kind of where I'm coming from. So, Matt, one of my questions was just about the crisis of faith. Matt, you said you were a pastor for a long time.
No, I didn't. I've never said that.
Oh, no?
Yeah.
Oh.
This is something I've been correcting for 15 years. I was never a pastor. I was studying with the intent of becoming a pastor when I found my way out of religion.
Okay, I see then. May I ask, what made you eventually leave and become atheist?
I found out that the reasons for my belief weren't warranted, and when I questioned other people, they couldn't give me any reasons that were warranted either.
Okay, I see. So it's more like a thorough analysis, and then thinking that it was just not congruent with the reality of things. Is that it?
Yes, there is insufficient evidence to warrant believing in a God, as far as I can tell.
Okay, I see. Okay, that just leads me to my next question, actually. So I know that this is commonly how many people do become atheist. I follow some atheist YouTubers like Jacqueline Glenn, Mr. Atheist, kind of the same story. But I've also heard about people, say, being abused out of religion, like religious people oppressing the individuals and weaponizing the religion to hurt individuals. And eventually there's just so much trauma associated with religion that people leave it entirely. And I feel like this isn't really talked about as much. Have you encountered atheists who left for this reason? And what do you advise for atheists in this regard if you have?
I don't run into too many atheists who were bullied out of it. I run into atheists who had problems with churches, which spawned an investigation that ultimately led to them getting out of it. I've had people who've left certain specific religions because the doctrines of those religions were antithetical to their life, or, maybe they were gay and they didn't like what the religion had to say about that, which, hey, good for them. But I don't know that this people being bullied out of religion is a large enough demographic to really address.
I see. Okay. Because I did bring this up with people of faith and people of who aren't like religious, who are atheists, and yeah, I haven't exactly heard many perspectives about that. It's just because I personally know a friend who kind of was like almost oppressed out of it. That's kind of why I was asking this question. But you feel like there's not enough atheists to address that. Is that right?
It does seem like it is an inconvenient fact of human psychology that a lot of the time emotional trauma or just suffering in general can cause somebody to intellectually reevaluate their views. And now I don't know at the end of the day which you end up attributing their deconversion to, but yeah, I think a lot of people there is some emotional experience that comes first, and then that jars them enough to make them do some kind of investigation into what they previously believed. But at the end of the day, it's really both, isn't it?
So I think I see what you're saying. It's more like the emotional situation or the distressing situation it acts like a catalyst for them to start questioning. Is that what you're saying?
There's lots of there's a lot. So Mo, I promise I'm not trying to be obtuse. I'm not getting the purpose. I'm not getting the point of what you're trying to get to, because you originally just said here, your question was, is there an advantage to prayer? And now you're asking about, have we run into atheists who were bullied out of their religion? Not really.
Not really. Okay, so I guess I didn't mention the crisis of faith thing in my original topic, but I can get to my question on prayer real quick then. It was just another question entirely different. But yeah, I did want to ask about prayer, if I can do that. I think we have 4 minutes left. I'll ask quickly.
Well, we're gonna go over time, but I want to get. Yeah, I mean, there's still like 5 or 6 calls to get to after this. So.
Okay. All right. Sure. So from some of the podcasts I've listened to, there seems to be the notion that there are some disadvantages to prayer. Like one of them being that some people fall into the trap of praying, but then not taking action to solve their problems. But okay. What is your opinion on prayer as a coping strategy? And I only bring this up because I used to work as a mental health distress center representative, and many clients called in about prayer, and I didn't know what to say about that.
Yeah, it's really easy. I would prefer to give people science-based, evidence-based coping mechanisms. But at the end of the day, if science and evidence aren't something that appeal to them, and the only thing that's keeping them from hurting themselves and others is believing in a God, then I'm going to begrudgingly encourage them to keep believing in a God.
Okay. So, I think I see what you're saying. Okay. Fair enough.
But Scott's got something to add.
Yeah. Well, the notion of prayer seems to get employed in 2 different ways. One way is what we call petitionary prayer, which is where you're actually like trying to change something about the external world. And that, I think there are a lot of really, really good reasons for thinking that nobody should believe that's a thing, or that those prayers are answered.
Even if there was a God, because if God's got a plan, you're either praying for what's in his plan or not.
Exactly. Now, the other kind of prayer, which I think is a little bit of a misnomer, but I think there are clearly psychological benefits and perhaps even ethical benefits to being contemplative and looking inward and trying to change yourself in such a way that it changes your behavior. I think a lot of people, some people call meditation prayer. That's fine. I mean, their introspection is never, ever a bad thing. And prayer in that sense is great. It's the petitionary prayer that is often not only impotent, but dangerous.
Right. So, like, for example, those faith healing prayers, for example, like, is that what you mean by petitionary? One of them.
Yeah, well, that's a really extreme. You don't even have to go that far for petitionary prayer to be bad.
Okay, fair enough.
Hey God, please help my team win this sports ball thing.
Exactly.
Wouldn't that be cheating?
I see what you're saying. Okay, that definitely, like, taking that in. I know I had quite a few questions, but there is limited time. I just want to ask one very quick question, last one, and then you can pass the phone to somebody else if that's cool.
Okay.
So this is just about Islamophobia, the concept of Islamophobia. Me growing up in a Muslim background, like that is something that I've kind of seen. So I see in many like people, mostly like some atheists, even some other theists, say they criticize the concept of Islamophobia, saying that debating or criticizing Islam, it shouldn't be called Islamophobia. There should be no protection on those ideas. And I personally agree that Islam is, not above criticism. Anyone should be able to have discussions about it. I'm questioning it myself. But the way I thought of Islamophobia is, just about bigoted treatment, like of Muslims. Like
it should properly, if we're going to label things properly, what people generally mean by Islamophobia would actually be better described as Muslim bigotry, where you're directing bigotry at Muslims. I'm not afraid of Islam. I'm probably not afraid of Muslims, but I'm certainly afraid of what some Muslims might do on behalf of Islam. I'm afraid of what some Christians will do on behalf of Christianity. And I will criticize Islam and Muhammad and Christianity and Jesus, all of them. And I will also criticize individual believers and adherents of those religions for what they do. But I'm not directing bigotry at Muslims. So when people use Islamophobia to highlight bigotry directed at Muslims, I think that's a valid criticism. I think it's just, it is as poorly named as the Satanic Temple is.
Yeah, I agree.
Because the Satanic Temple has nothing to do with Satan as an actual figure.
Right, because something that they don't actually worship Satan.
Correct.
I was just going to ask, what was your view on Islamophobia? But it seems like it's just in your view, it's just a poor term. It should just be called Muslim bigotry.
So, but let me ask you, when Islam says that we're not allowed to draw Muhammad, and I decide to draw Muhammad, is that bigotry directed at Muslims? Is that Islamophobia when I do what I'm told I'm not supposed to do?
Okay. I do have a bit of a nuanced idea about that. So I'll tell you. So I guess for me, it's like, you live in this country, it's a free country, you have the right to do what you want. Having said that, if you do draw Muhammad, is there really another point of drawing Muhammad besides just making fun of Muslims?
No, the reason, for example, hang on, I can answer that. I have drawn Muhammad, and I did it specifically because Muslims told me I was not allowed to, and you don't get to tell me that.
So, no, I see what you're saying. Like, you have every right to do what you want to do, for sure. But I think, like, when they say you're not allowed to draw Muhammad, like, Muslims or anyone shouldn't draw Muhammad because it's disrespectful to their faith, wouldn't that be worth considering? And just wait one second. I just want to give a quick example. It's like, for example, Catholicism. Say they're having their Sunday Mass, and I don't believe in Catholicism, but they can do what they want. Would I go into a cathedral during their mass and break some?
No, that's completely, no. You're comparing apples and oranges. I'm not walking into a Catholic mass and disrupting it, but I will buy a box of those communion wafers that they think actually turns into Jesus and dip them in queso and eat them on the show, which I've done.
Jesus.
Okay. Well, I guess you're free to do that. I guess my question is, what is the point of doing that if it's not just to make fun of them?
Okay,
that's why I said
it was a bit nuanced.
Mo, so I'm not sure if you're an American, but the freedom of speech and freedom of expression is like one of our highest values, right? It's like the master value. And when one of those values, I mean, historically, this is true for, patriotic Americans going back 100, 200, 300 years. Historically, when those rights appear to be infringed upon or are in danger of being infringed upon, there is a kind of moral, patriotic duty to put those rights to the test. So this is why we as Americans, we burn the American flag. It's not because we hate America. It's because we love America and we love the First Amendment, right? And so if somebody says, you are not allowed to draw a picture of this one thing, you can draw anything else, but this one thing is forbidden, then we are protecting that right by testing that prohibition. We are pushing back against it. It's not because we're having a laugh, and it's not because we're being assholes. It's because you want to preserve and protect that right. And one way to do it is to challenge anyone who tries to infringe upon it. There is a real utility to drawing the Prophet Muhammad in this context.
There's also this notion, and I know you're living in Canada. There's this notion, though, that you don't have a right to not be offended. And when the religious individuals try to impose onto others who are not adherents of their religion that they should not be allowed to do things that might offend the religious, I'm going to do those things. Largely, I mean, granted, if they say, please don't kill people, it will offend us, I'm not going to run around killing people. But I'm saying, if you're going to, it's like, oh, you must take this seriously. No, I respect people and people's rights. I have no respect for beliefs until those beliefs have earned it. And so if you want to tell me, as Catholics do, that when your priest hands out the wafer, that it actually turns into the body of Jesus Christ, that transubstantiation is real, then I should be allowed to ask you whether that piece of cracker that you just put in your mouth turned into a toenail or a foreskin. And that is there specifically to cite the absurdity of this and to show that you're basically claiming something that you can't demonstrate and trying to impose it on others. And so when Muslims say that, oh, you don't get to draw Muhammad, I did. I don't do it all the time. I would have never, ever, I'm not an artist. I would have never drawn Muhammad had it not been for the fact that followers of Islam were trying to impose their views on me. And you don't get to do that. I don't get to tell you that you have to stop believing in your God or that you have to respect, I don't know, science. I'd like it if you did. But if you don't want to, it's not sacrilege because there's no religion part here.
How'd we do, Mo?
I don't know. Mo hung up.
Oh.
I'm sorry that people are hanging up. I guess we're being really thorough. Hey, this should be kind of fun because we might be able to take and answer this call without that. So, Lance, are you there?
Hey, guys. Long-time fan, first-time caller.
Yeah.
Scott and Matt, thanks for having me on the show.
You had a question for us because we're running overtime. I was just going to have you.
I know that.
Okay.
The last guy kind of droned on and had me kind of looking at the ceiling. But
I was just going to have you ask your question and we would answer it.
Perfect. So in the world we're living in today, with social media and iPhones and how everything is, the sexualization of young people, how do you think that living it? No, don't sigh before I even get the question.
No, I have to sigh because I'm looking at here, and the question that you asked that you wanted us to address was, how is atheism a net positive on society? And my answer is, it may or may not be, and it doesn't matter. You can answer it with a question: how is not believing in Bigfoot a net positive on society? It's irrelevant to what the truth is. But now you're going down this path of modern society lacks morals and everything's sexualized. Please demonstrate this lack of morals that you want to claim, because I don't think it exists.
Let me at least get the question out, okay. And then one moment. So we live in a time of, it's very fast moving. It's very highly stimulating. And I think there's a lot of things that are bad happening morally in this world that we live in.
Like what?
So I'll give you examples. In 2020, when we have the transgender or like the drag queen reading to kids and things like that. How does
transgender and drag queens are different things? But we'll get to it. I know you're not done yet. I'll tell you when you're done. Believe me.
Okay. But how does not having a moral fabric, whether you believe it or not, like whether it be Christianity or some other theistic religion that gives you a moral backbone and fabric for the family, how does removing that from the picture, just to be right about science, how does that benefit society as a net positive?
So, hey, Lance, your question has a premise in it that I think you must know that Matt and I would reject, which is that if you don't have religion, you don't believe in God, then you don't have any kind of moral foundation. I mean, you have to know that we don't think that's true.
No, but I understand, but by and large, the average person is not smart.
Okay.
And, if you
can I ask this question? Do you think it's immoral for a drag queen to read stories to children?
Yes, I do.
Why?
Because being a drag queen, it's a sexually active act.
No.
And anything sexual.
No, it's not.
Dress up like
it's not. You're just wrong about what a drag queen is. I mean, you're just demonstrably wrong about what a drag queen is, but please tell me why it's immoral.
Are you a drag queen?
I have been a drag queen, actually. And is sex immoral?
So have I.
Around children, of course it is. You both have been drag queens.
Why is it immoral for someone to wear clothing associated with the gender that they are not in front of children? Why is that immoral?
It's because it's a sexual act.
It's not a sexual act.
Where's the sex happening?
A drag queen reading a storybook to a child. There's no sexual act involved.
You're dressing up as a slut, as a man.
Holy shit, did you just step into the wrong fucking show, bucko? First of all, stop slut shaming people. There's nothing wrong with being a slut. But second of all, drag queens aren't dressing up like a slut. They are people who are dressing up of a gender that is not theirs. That is a completely separate issue. You want to go ahead and you want to get into your trans bigotry too, so that I can continue to smack you around? If you want to make a claim that something is actually immoral, you better make a claim that it's immoral and not just keep asserting that it's about sex or that somebody's a slut, because all you're doing is showing that you are one of the average people who are too ignorant to understand this. So please continue.
No, I mean, are you a fucking pedophile? Like, what are you on about? You want to dress up and be a slut around kids? Is that what
seriously?
You
just asked me if I'm a pedophile?
Wait.
Go ahead, Scott. You bat him around for a while.
Yeah.
I need a break. This is hilarious.
No, this is like fascinating to me because Lance, what is the slut part? I dress up like a woman.
You dance on stage and you sing Madonna, and you dance around. I wouldn't want Marilyn Monroe dancing around, even as a woman, a straight woman. I wouldn't want a dancer to be around a child.
You do realize that drag queens are not dancing on a pole in front of children. They're reading them storybooks, right?
Yeah, you just said they're reading a storybook, not dancing.
Why would you not have why are you making aberrant behavior positive around children who are already impressionable and confused?
Why are you engaging in puritanical slut shaming when you don't understand what any of this is about?
Flat out wrong. It's unbelievable that you think this is okay behavior.
Lance, wait.
Okay.
Let's find some common ground, okay? Right? Yeah. So we both believe that we all believe that pedophilia is wrong, right? We all believe that
pederasty is wrong. Pedophilia is an attraction, right. And if not acted upon, they should be lauded for not acting on it. But yes, I understand.
You're right. I stand corrected.
Unbelievable.
Acting on pedophilia is wrong.
I know it's unbelievable to you because you're an ignorant little bigot, but we're schooling you, so you'll be fine. Trust me. Just hang with us for like 5 minutes, if you just hang with us for like 5 minutes and let Scott talk, we'll fix you.
So Lance, I understand you're worried about that. You're worried. Your concern is sexually abusing children, right? I get it. That's a totally legitimate concern. Nobody wants children to be molested. Nobody wants children to be exposed to things that they are not cognitively old enough to be exposed to yet. Right? We're on the same page about all of that. But when you say that when you call it perverted or you call it slut, you're just begging the question, right? You're assuming your conclusion as an argument for your conclusion. So show us how it's abusive for someone to dress up as the opposite sex and read a child a book, because the kids fucking love it.
It's mentally abusive on the kid because they're very confused because they know that's not a woman. And
I think you're confused. I don't think
weird makeup. It's like
the actual science from the experts show that kids aren't confused.
Don't fucking science me, the grass Tyson pedophile fuck. That's ridiculous. You're ridiculous.
Okay, and you're gone.
Yeah,
just like I told you I'd tell you when you're fucking done, and now you're done. But you did such a wonderful job because you called in and made really sound arguments based on badass assertions and claims that I'm a pedophile and that you don't want people to science you. Well, thank you, because it's science that is actually exposing this stuff. And it's science that people like you are terrified of, that the world might not be the way your small-minded upbringing, which isn't your fault, made you think it was, that the world may be bigger and more robust. Would either Scott or I be okay with people performing a live sex act in front of a group of children at a library? I'm pretty sure that without even looking at the screen, I can say neither Scott nor myself would advocate for that. And yet, I'm pretty sure that both of us would be happy to have a man dressed as a woman read a storybook to children. Because drag queens aren't the same as transgender. Oh, and by the way, I'd be happy with a transgender person reading a book to children as well, because trans rights are humans' rights, trans women are women, trans men are men. You're so terrified of everything is about sex, Scott.
Yeah, well, I wanted to ask, would you have been okay with a man dressing up as a cow or a sheep, and reading? Because does that mean that the man wants to fuck the sheep, or that the children should want to fuck the sheep? Like, where exactly is the sex act coming in?
Oh, yeah. I actually went in a different direction. I was thinking, what if a guy dressed up as a clown? Because some kids are terrified as clowns, and that could be potentially confusing. And coming to read a story, and you're not going to object to that. But you're going to object to this, because the one thing that the caller doesn't understand: drag queens are fun. That is fun. Even when it's sexualized, even when we're doing the burlesque show and they're up on the stage and they're dancing around. It's just fun. It's not like the people in the audience at a drag show are in danger of being molested, or it's a show.
And perhaps we should say, that we should acknowledge that a drag queen, like anybody else, can cross the line, right? A drag queen, like anybody, any straight person, is just as likely to cross that line as a drag queen is. And in my experience, and I'm sure yours as well, Matt, I've seen drag queen, I've gone to the drag queen shows, and I've also seen those same drag queens then interact with a child. And you know what? They turn off all the sexual stuff.
Yes.
They just become compassionate and kind and fun for the child. This conflation is really dangerous.
I'm so first of all, we're gonna stop taking calls here and kind of try and wrap things up, because first of all, I want to genuinely thank you for doing this. I hope you can do it many, many more times over the years. I've been waiting for you to do it for 8 years. And also I appreciate the fact, and I think people watching the show appreciate the fact, that while I might get up and just go into a tear on slavery or drag queens and trans stuff, you are an incredibly measured individual who's far kinder than I'm going to be. And yet, I think if they watch it back, you will see that Scott got just as fed up with the bullshit as I did, just has a slightly different way of addressing it. And I'm just sitting here going, like, I have really good friends who are trans. Now, I think people in general are good. It's not something I can demonstrate. I think that by and large, people in general just are good. And that the people who are truly awful are the exceptions to the rule. And so when we get a call, like our last caller, I'm not even convinced that even he believes what he's saying. Whether or not it was a troll, I don't know. Whether or not he's sincere about what he believes, I don't know. But I do know that what he said, every word that he said, is representative of somebody's beliefs out there, because there are people who are absolutely terrified of trans people. There are people who are absolutely terrified of drag queens. They don't know the difference between the two. They don't know the difference between sex and gender. They don't know the difference between gender identity and gender expression. They don't know what it's like to be in that position, because they have been in this position where the world has apparently been exactly what they thought it was for their entirety of their life, and they wake up in a new era where something doesn't fit. And so his only option, if he's sincere, is to suggest that, did you hear him? He's like, oh, were you a drag queen? Why, yes, I was. I've done the show as Matilda. And I must say that for, a much rounder person at the time, I did fine. I had wanted to do the show in drag for a long time before I did. I'm not going to go into sex and sexuality and kinks, because it doesn't matter. Because at the end of the day, it reminds me of the people who are afraid about letting trans people use the bathroom that's associated with their gender. And when I was on stage with Dinesh D'Souza back in March, he tried to do this thing, saying, if a guy comes into the women's bathroom just waving his testicles around. Now, Scott, let me ask you, in your entire life, have you ever gone into a men's room and just waved your testicles around for everybody?
Funnily enough, I've resisted the temptation. Yeah.
And yet this is Dinesh D'Souza's big fear of what will happen if we let trans people use the bathroom associated with that men will just dress up like women, go into the women's restroom and go, hey, look at my nuts, ladies. That just doesn't happen.
Yeah. The men who are going to do that are going to do that anyway.
Yeah. It's not like having a law that says you can't use this would stop anybody that really wanted to do it. But I've used bathrooms, including, like, I was in the Navy for years, and there's a huge head up above the berthing, and you got all these urinals and everything else. You're standing next to everybody. But also, we've all been to like the ball game stadiums and the festivals where they have like the one big long urinal that's just constantly dripping water. Everybody goes in there, lets it all. And yet, I don't think I've ever seen another man's testicles. I've seen penises, because sometimes it's hard to see. And some guys are a little more proud about, showing it. But I don't think I've ever seen another guy's testicles in a bathroom. And yet that's what he was afraid of. And I've never seen a drag queen reading a story to a group of kids do anything at all that was sexual or inappropriate. Meanwhile, the lights are on. There's people watching. It's not like they could, do anything. I'm more worried about the supermarket mall Santa than I am about a drag queen reading a book.
Yeah.
And I'm not that worried about Santa.
If a drag queen reading a storybook to children did do something that was sexually inappropriate, we would condemn that. Obviously. Yeah. The problem is that that's imagined. It's not actually happening, or at least in the circumstance that we're talking about, it didn't.
Yeah.
Can I tell you?
You can tell me anything. I'll stay on the show for the next 3 hours if you want to tell me stuff, but go ahead.
Oh my God. No. I want to let everybody go home. But the closest I've ever come to God, spiritual experience, I was in an airport bathroom, and I'm standing at the urinal, and I look over to my right, and there's Ron Jeremy, famous porn star Ron Jeremy. And I'm going, oh my God, I'm standing next to Ron. Should I look? Like, should I do it? And then as I'm doing the moral calculus in my mind, whether it's like worth looking, I look over to my left. An orange robed Zen Buddhist is taking a piss to my left. So I'm like caught between. It was the most spiritual experience I've ever had.
My ex-wife has a great story about Ron Jeremy as well, but I'll save that one for when we're not on the air. Oh my gosh! First of all, thank you guys. Thank you, Scott, so much. For everybody who's watching live, if you enjoyed having Scott on, want him on again, you can click the donation thing. You can also email us, tv@atheist-community.org. You can reach us in a number of different ways. I'm absolutely thrilled. I have had both an intellectual and just general man crush on Scott for years. So I'm glad that we're friends, and we don't get to talk enough, and I don't get to see him enough. Yeah. If he was in Austin and wasn't like, doing soap operas all the time, he'd already been a regular on the show. And so today's something I've looked forward to. I can't thank you enough. It's an honor. I hope we get you back again. And for everybody who's watching, let's pop up the picture of all the people behind the scenes who made it possible, including spending time talking to Scott and working through technical issues days ago to make sure that we could do this show. Thanks to everybody who screened calls. We're very sorry that we didn't get to all the calls, even though we ran a little bit over. Please take care of yourself. Please exercise safety during this time of pandemic. And as a reminder, while I rant about all kinds of things on this show, there's a news story that popped up in Time magazine in the last day, which is that 85 babies tested positive for COVID-19 in one Texas county. I think it's down around Corpus Christi. What we're seeing today is July 19th. And on the 4th of July, 15 days ago, Americans, in their need to celebrate their independence and their pride in their country, as a former Navy member, I understand this. As somebody who loves fireworks, I understand this. But they threw caution to the wind, and they didn't take seriously some of this. And so states, and mostly quite a few southern states, Texas, Florida, Georgia, Alabama, or Arizona, are having a surge We never got over the hump. We never got there. We just kind of lulled down, and now we're spiking, and we're having more cases, record cases, 15,000 on one day, 10,000 on another day, 40,000 in the United States in a given day, over and over again. Science is real. Science isn't always right. It's not always perfect. But if you're not willing to make the decisions based on what the best science says, I don't know how you can possibly go through life. If you're like the last caller who doesn't want somebody to science you, that last caller is probably somebody who's not going to wear a mask in public, who's not going to take the precautions that the experts say we should, and may wind up leading to the death of countless people. India's numbers are on the rise right now. They were incredibly low because they weren't really doing any testing. And now India, I think today or yesterday, had more cases than the United States. This is a global pandemic. It's not going to stop or slow down. We're a long way from a vaccine. And the one and only path we have to trying to keep us all alive is for those people who are able to stay home, to wear masks, to minimize their engagement, to do so. Please follow the directives, the World Health Organization, and the health experts in your area to do your part for all of the people who can't. Just in the same way, we encourage people to get vaccinated so that we build herd immunity for the people who cannot, because they're immune compromised, get vaccines. Please take care of yourself and each other. We greatly appreciate your viewership, and I look forward to seeing and hear from you all next week. Thank you.
What are we doing, man? What are we doing?
No.